Hello and welcome to my series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, vision and philosophy define our contemporary world. My guest today is an eminent Islamic scholar, philosopher, teacher who embodies the highest aspirations of his faith. He has worked hard to reinterpret, interpret, redefine and articulate an Islam that is relevant to contemporary times. His writings and teachings have been translated and used at universities across the world, in Arabia, in the West, in India. He has been the apostle for a dialogue between religions and cultivating the middle ground that might yield peace. I'm delighted to welcome Maulana Wahiduddin Khan.
Thank you.
Aapne, you have written so extensively on Islam. You have done a definitive translation of the Quran. There is so much violence that is perceived in the name of Islam, of defending Islam. What does, for you, the Quran say on the issue of the use of violence? Historically, when we look at the life of the Prophet, at that time too, that the Prophet, in order to establish Islam, led and participated in many violent crusades. To what degree and what is the basis of Islam's position on the use of violence?
It's very good question, very relevant.
Gee.
According to my study, I'm an Islamic scholar, and so according to my study and my experience, Islam is a religion of peace in complete sense of the word. But there are two different version of Islam. One is scriptural version, dusra what is practiced by Muslims. So people generally refer to Muslim practices, but being an Islamic scholar, I always see the scriptures. Society is not, no society can be a perfect society. It is impossible. So in every society there are some bad things, some deviations from the ideology. So if you want to know what is Islam, then you have to see the scripture, that is Quran and Hadith. And if you want to see how are Muslims, then you have to see the Muslim society. So as far as the Islamic teaching is concerned, it is very clear in Islam that Islam is a religion of peace. For example, there is a very important and very relevant verse in the Quran, As-sulhu khair. It is general teaching of Islam. As-sulhu khair means reconciliation is the best. It means that if you are facing some differences, so you have to adopt the conciliatory course of action rather than confrontational course of action.
But isn't it also true, Maulana Sahib, that one is able to use any scripture to interpret it, to justify all kinds of actions? And the Islamic extremists, and I entirely agree with you that any community and any faith will have its extremists, its fundamentalist people who will choose to interpret it in a manner that suits perhaps their political agendas or economic disparities. But there are many elements that come in the expressions of violence. So assuming that this is the teaching of Islam, of peace and reconciliation, what do you feel are the roots of the current churning in Islam that is yielding so much violence? Is it sort of, the history of the Middle East, the historical imperatives that have bred resentment that now find expression in violence and seek justification in the Quran?
Fine. It is also imperative that there may be some different interpretations, and these interpretations are outcome of their own perception, their own conditioning, their own circumstances. So it is every time it is possible to find different interpretations. I agree, but because when comes interpretation, there is difference. But if one is sincere to understand the Quranic teachings, sincerity is the must. So, and he is able to decondition his mind. He is able to go through Quran objectively. Then there is, I don't think that there is, it is, no doubt you can reach the right message of the Islam, right message. Because people generally obsess some obsessions, some malices, some bias. So due to these conditionings, they adopt some other kind of interpretation other than true interpretation. As far as myself concerned, I am completely an objective person. I don't live in hate, for example. There are news in Muslim media, every day there are news, some atrocities, some conspiracies, but I don't agree in these kind of news.
But tell us, what do you think are the roots of the current churning, the current violence that is being attributed to Islamic militant groups in many parts of the world?
Yes. Yesterday I met an Egyptian scholar. He was Dr. Salahuddin as-Sultan. He advocated those jihadi groups. He was a youth person, he was Egyptian. So I said that you have to see the result. If you find some difficulties, some problem, so, and you want to go to jihad, so why you are not seeing the result? You are doing jihad perhaps since 100 years, but no result. So is jihad an action seeking some positive result, or it is some negative activities? So he agreed that result is very important. So I referred some verses from the Quran, and I said that also you are abusing the word jihad, because according to the Quran, jihad is a defensive action, not offensive action. It means that if there is attack, then you are allowed to go to war, otherwise not. And the second condition is that jihad is prerogative of an established state. No agencies other than state are allowed to go to war. So if you see these verses of the Quran, you will admit that there is no that all those wars like guerrilla wars, proxy wars, and undeclared war, secret war, all those wars are not allowed in Islam. And all these jihads are not, I said that these jihads are not fought by any state. Only some private organizations are doing these jihads. So it is haram, it is unlawful.
You have been a great proponent and have entered into so many processes and dialogue with people who the Islam might, or at least sort of the extreme wing of Islam might describe as kafirs. So what is your understanding of this notion of kafir, and what forms the basis of the Islamic dialogue with other faiths?
Very good question. There is a great misunderstanding about the word kafir. Literally, kafir means one who refuses. One who refuses. Inkar karne wala. So, but generally people take it as a equivalent to non-Muslim. It is incorrect. People generally think that who is not Muslim, he is a kafir. No, it is wrong. According to Islam, everyone is simply insan. Ya ayyuhan nas, ayyuhal insan. Hundred times Quran addresses people with this word, insan and nas. So everyone is basically insan. That's all. And if you convey some message and he refuses to accept you, and after a long time, maybe 25 years, because Prophet tried to convey his message up to 23 years. So if after the struggle of 23 years one refuses, then you can say he is a kafir. Kafir means he has refused my message. Otherwise he is insan.
So what is the relationship of a believer with a person who just insan? And in a sense, a disbeliever. So is there a sort of an obligation to persuade him to become a believer, to interact with him, engage with him in ways different to what you would with other believers? What is the relationship?
I will give a very relevant example from the life of the Prophet of Islam. You know, Prophet of Islam was born in Mecca. Then he migrated to Medina. So he, at that time, there were some Jewish tribes in Medina. So what happened? One day, Prophet saw a funeral procession passing through a street in Medina. So tradition says that Prophet was seated at that time. On seeing the funeral, he stood up in respect. So one of his companions said, "O Prophet, he was Jew, not a Muslim. He was a non-Muslim, not a Muslim." So Prophet replied, "Alaysat nafsan? Alaysat nafsan? Was he not a human being?" It means that Prophet was able to discover commonality between himself and that non-Muslim. So this is the true spirit of Islam.
You have often in your writings and teachings called for a more contemporary interpretation or a contemporary understanding, an application of Islam and the teachings of the Quran. Doesn't that implicitly suggest that the Quran is to be interpreted and understood in a social context that is valid and relevant today? And in many senses, many religions have their origins in particular social environments and social contexts to meet social needs. So perhaps, the Prophet said you can have, more than one wife because there was a social need for the protection of women. Or the Prophet said you should not eat pork because there was a social need. Those times and those circumstances change. So to what degree is the word of the Prophet final, sacrosanct, and locked in? Or can it be interpreted to current social needs?
According to my study, Quran gives only some basic teachings. You know, Quran is relatively is a small book. So only few things are declared as unlawful, like pork and wine and adultery. So there is a very important principle in Islam, al-aslu fil ashya al-ibaha. It means that anything which is not declared as unlawful is lawful. So when in Quran only few things are declared as unlawful, so all other things are lawful. It's very important teaching of Quran. Then you know any interpretation, that is ijtihad. In Arabic it is ijtihad. In English we say interpretation. So there is interpretation is very open in Quran and Hadith. You can go to any extent. So I think that this principle of Islam gives us freedom to interpret Islam according to our needs, according to our circumstance, according to the requirement of age.
Recently, a popular news magazine has done a cover story on fatwas, and how there is a collection of fatwas that are issued that comment on all kinds of things, from the use of lipstick to the length of Sania Mirza's shorts, and a whole range of issues. How do you, as a modern Islamic scholar, look at this whole issue of fatwas? And we're not getting to the more complicated ones on Salman Rushdie and what have you, but just in everyday life and living.
According to my knowledge, all these fatwas are absurd, nothing to do with Islam.
I think implicit in the issue of fatwa and in many of the pronouncements of the Muslim law board and looking at a whole range of issues, and I will not burden you with details there, but as a practicing Muslim yourself who represents the highest aspirations of the faith, you're a Maulana, what changes would you like to see in the way that the Muslim community has organized itself, engages in the processes of politics, and in pursues its self-interest? What would you like to see changed?
There are so many things which need change, but before change we have to educate Muslims. We cannot begin from changes. We have to begin from educating Muslims, because Muslims are backward in education everywhere, even in Muslim countries. So first of all, we have to begin from education. First of all, we have to educate Muslims. Otherwise, no change will affect.
But how do you educate them? In India we have struggled with this notion of education. Whether it's been the right-wing Hindutva movement, and then somebody else comes in and says, well, we don't agree with this is what we should have. Centrist position, then you have the left position, and then you have in the madrasas, you have another position. So who decides, and how do you decide what is a good education, and how would you define a good education for the Muslim community in a sense? And would it need to be different to the education that the larger community gets and non-Muslims receive?
By education, I simply mean to modernize the madrasas, to make people know what is that world in which we are living at present, because madrasa people don't know anything outside madrasa. So I think that it is a very good beginning to modernize the madrasas,
Why not just have secular education for everybody and let the process of religion be something that happens in the home?
Yes, I do agree. It's a very good point. I always say that you have to send your children in secular institutions, and if you want to educate, and if you want religious education, then at your home. It is good to educate your children at home in terms of religion. So, ghar, your home is best religious school, but you send your boy to secular education, secular institutions.
And I hasten to add girl.
Even girl, even girl, because it is not good to leave girls uneducated. It is not good.
Maulana, what do you think is the basis for interfaith dialogue, interfaith conciliation, the celebration of diversity, or the cultivation of unity in diversity? Do we just celebrate the fact that Islam is different to Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, Sikhism, Jainism, or what have you? Or do we look for these common strands and say, no, that, somewhere ultimately all these religions are teaching the same thing?
I believe in dialogue. Dialogue is a very important process, and I believe in useful dialogue. And how to make dialogue useful? I think it requires true spirit of understanding and acceptance what is rationally good and right. So true spirit of understanding is required. Then if you find that there are some differences, because difference is part of nature, so it is but natural to find some differences among different traditions. So the best way is what is mentioned in the Quran, lakum dinukum waliya din. For me, your religion, for you your religion, for me mine. It means that follow one and respect all. So first of all, you have to discover similarities and understanding. But if you find that there are some differences, then you have to follow this formula. Follow one and respect all.
In India, we have celebrated secularism, we have interpreted secularism perhaps differently to what many other liberal democracies, particularly in the West, have interpreted. And that has usually meant sort of either a hands-off approach of the state to religion. In India, that the state manages several religious trusts of the Hindus. It sort of has a stake in supporting many Muslim institutions and other minority groups. What do you see as an ideal structure for the relationship between religion and the state? Do you see a proactive role where the state supports all religions, and then the state says, no, this is a personal, private business, and you do what you need to do? What is your vote for?
I think that secular formula is best, but there are two different versions of secularism. An extremist version is not very good. I don't believe those in extremist version of secularism. But the liberal version of secularism, that is very good. According to the liberal version, secularism means simply policy of non-interference. Policy of non-interference, it is secularism. So I think that in a multi-religious society, it is very good to adopt secular system. Secular system means give freedom to every spiritual group, every religion, and state must follow the policy of good for all. What is good for all, that is state policy.
Maulana Sahib, you're a practicing Muslim. You are, a great scholar, and so you're called a Maulana. What is the personal aspiration that someone at your age feels for yourself? You have devoted so much of your life to, the social dimension of interpreting Islam for other people, making it contemporary, trying to reduce conflict between faiths, trying to make Islam a more dynamic religion. Is there a personal aspiration that coexists? That, I want to go to Allah, I want to go to paradise, or I want to go to heaven. What is your own aspiration?
In my early life, I was disturbed with the differences. Because everywhere there are differences. So I was disturbed with these differences. But now, after reading the book History of History, compiled by
Arnold
Toynbee, now I am very much satisfied that difference is not only part of nature, but difference is way of development. Because difference breeds challenges, and through challenge we progress. Without challenge there is no progress. So now I am satisfied and I am not disturbed with these differences. This is my finding.
पर इसमें कोई आपकी अपनी ख्वाहिश है अपने लिए कि मैं ये चाहता हूँ कि मैं यहाँ पहुँच जाऊँ, that I want to gain so much more insight, understanding. What do you seek?
My target is truth. I am a seeker. Even today I am a seeker. So I want to reach that destination and experience that truth with the capital T. What is the truth? So I want to embrace that truth and
do you feel close to it?
Yes.
About to reach the truth?
Yes, I feel myself close to it. Yes.
And what might happen when you discover the truth? Do you become enlightened in the sense that we in many of the sort of South Asian, Hindu, Indic traditions believe? What happens when you discover the truth?
Yes, enlightenment is the result of discovery, of realization. When you realize the truth, you become an enlightened person. This is my experience.
Maulana, thank you very much. This has been a great honor and a great blessing.
Thank you.
Thank you.